This is the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 5th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under the bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass away from the law until it is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise.
So you should have in your bulletin a checklist. There should be a checklist in your bulletin that you should have gotten. And it is a real, honest-to-goodness checklist from Seminary. And I wanted you to have a visual or a reference point for what I'll be talking about. And you can sort of skim through it while I'm talking, but you do not need to fill it out. I mean, if you're particularly enthusiastic this morning and feeling really gung-ho for the sermon, you're welcome to, but I'm not collecting it. I never want to read another preaching critique forum on myself ever again. Because you see, in seminary, part of the required coursework includes homiletics class, otherwise known as preaching class. So typically, the young seminarian takes their first preaching class in the first semester of their first year. So all the rookies, they're thrown in this room all together, right? And you know, we are all anxious as all get out. Because we're fresh, we're excited, and we're confident that we have something to say that's going to change the world. It's also true that we're very, very fragile and very self-conscious. Because see, in preaching class, you have to stand up and you preach basically to a bunch of Pharisees. There is no harsher congregation than a bunch of wannabe pastors. They are all armed with the same biblical knowledge that you have, or possibly more. They have attended the same classes that you have attended. And they have just been given the preaching critique sheet, which they get to scrutinize your sermon with. And nobody in preaching class checks out or falls asleep, if not for the sole reason of possibly finding some great sermon illustration that they themselves could possibly use later on down the line. So anyway, the way it went for us was this. We had to dress professionally, which meant wear like suit clothes, or we could wear clerics. We had to craft our sermons to be precisely between 8 minutes and 12 minutes long, no less, no more. And then after we preached, we stood on the stage and our classmates offered their comments back to us. And in my class, the professor was the one who got to go last. Not intimidating at all. Everyone had to preach at least 3 times during the semester. And I feel like the goal of homiletics class was to instill in you, if you did not have stage fright before you started seminary, you were going to have it by the time you left. Well, I used to be a very, very nervous public speaker. So much so that I have actually passed out in front of people while talking. Thankfully, that never happened in seminary and has never happened in front of a congregation. So the second time I got up to preach in preaching class, I was okay. The first time had gone all right. So I got up there and did my thing. It went fine. I was still breathing. I was still standing. I had proclaimed the gospel. People had laughed a little bit. There were a few nods. My classmates were kind in their comments. And then it was my professor's turn. And she, mind you, it was a woman, she starts up. If you're going to wear a pink shirt. I had worn a pink shirt and black dress slacks to preach in. If you're going to wear a pink shirt and wear lipstick, then you cannot put your hand on your hip like this. I'm pretty sure that my putting my hand on my hip was nothing like the dramatic gesture that she made, but nevertheless, I was about to die. I don't remember anything she said to me after that. I do know that I did exactly what any young woman in seminary would do after a lashing like that. The next time I had to preach, I wore a dress and strappy black heels. Anyway, the point of all of this is, there are ways, at least according to seminaries and workshops and books, about the most effective preaching techniques. How to get the message across, how to get people to follow Jesus. So whether we were writing a 3-point sermon, or a narrative expository, or a parable, we all went through the same writing and preaching and critiquing process. So since today we are reading another portion from the Sermon on the Mount, I thought that we would do that. I thought that we would critique Jesus' most famous sermon. See, I have learned my lesson. I have no desire to ever go through that preaching critique thing again, but I figure that Jesus is fair game. Son of God and all, he should have the preaching, teaching God gig down to a science. So Jesus, could you come on up here? I have a few comments for your sermon. Well, I've already told Pastor Steve this. I thought about having Steve as a Jesus, but I thought it just might go to his head, so we've had different Jesus.
Thanks, Christine.
So Jesus, let's first talk about the strengths of your message. Use some good down-to-earth imagery. The salt and the city, those are good things. The people, they're going to hear them and they're going to remember them all week. Great technique. I would encourage you to continue using images like that in your future sermons. But a few things. Jesus, your preaching shows promise, so I mean this with all due respect, but there are quite a few things that need some work. First, light. You use it a lot in your preaching. It's a little bit overdone. Coming up with something more original, more provocative, more imaginative would do you well. It would be very, very helpful to your hearers. Second, Jesus, it's long. I mean, it's too long. The people are going to fall asleep. You cannot meander all over the place like that. And also, Jesus, we don't want to frighten the people. I mean, I wrote it down. This is what you said, for goodness sakes. You said, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. I mean, where's the good news in that? Day one, number one rule, good news. You gotta go with the good news. A few more things. No rolling your eyes at me. A few more things. Finally, remember at the beginning of the semester how we learned that every sermon needs to have a single focus. You, my brother, all over the map. Light, cities, salt, not coming to abolish the prophets, breaking and keeping the commandments. It's like you just couldn't decide what to say. Oh, and I mean, I know I told you that was the last thing, but just this one last thing. Next time, please wear something besides that ratty old tunic that you wear every single week. I mean, really. famous sermon of all times, picked apart. One would think, based on my critique of his sermon, that was not going to have any lasting impression on the world or on any people. Well, I have an acquaintance in seminary, and I got the check sheet that you have with you from her, and because I had recycled all mine long ago. And anyway, so my asking her to borrow a checklist prompted her to share a little bit of her struggle with me. And I did check with her to make sure if it's okay that I share her words with you. But this is what she said. She said, I prayed a lot last night about what type of preacher I want to be. I have actually said that I want to be a preacher like you. As a preacher, I don't think I can be just me. I was raised in a conservative church, and that isn't the preacher I want to be. But I'm not you, and I'm not Dr. Johns. I guess I'm not sure how to define me. And I think that's pretty heartbreaking. See, if you can't do all those things on the list, you aren't a good preacher. That's what she heard. Somehow in seminary we are taught that a 10-minute sermon should be able to be biblical, authentic, contextual, and life-changing all at the same time. Seems like a pretty tall order to me. But somehow in life we are taught the exact same thing. That if we are something other than what we are, if we are richer or faster or bigger or smarter or tastier or saltier or whatever you want to put on there, if we're just more, then that darn checklist, all of the excellent circles would be filled in. Which is why Jesus' litany of impossible impossibilities makes me want to criticize him. Because what Jesus wants is too extreme. Salt and light and city goes on and on as if we don't already feel inadequate enough much of the time. So I want to flunk him. But as much as I hate to admit it, Jesus was right to walk out on me. Not because I was going to flunk him, but because when he walked out, his actions said to me and said to all of us what I wasn't hearing in the Sermon on the Mount. See, he didn't walk out on me really because he was angry, and he didn't walk out on me really because he couldn't take it. He could take whatever I dished at him. The man rose from the dead. Jesus walked out because I was trying to tell him to be something that he wasn't. I tried to tell him how to proclaim, how to share God's love, how to be a better light, how to be better salt, how to be a better city. And in some ways, humanity has forever been trying to tell God how to be God. And God's not going to have any of it, because he already is the light of the universe and the salt of the universe. And what Jesus says to us today is that we already are too. That's why I wore strappy heels. For a few minutes that day, I felt judged and condemned for just trying my best. But for better or for worse, I refused to be anyone other than who I was. Now, truth be told, there wasn't some great epiphany moment then where I thought, oh, well, I'm salt or I'm light, so I'm going to trust what God's calling me to do. No, it wasn't like that at all. It was actually a lot of retaliation against her. However, looking back on it, what I ended up doing was claiming myself a little bit. And that's what God needs us to do. See, you are never, ever going to be enough. Not for anybody on this world. And in Jesus, what we see is that even when you're everything, even when you're God, you aren't enough for the world. The Sermon on the Mount is a challenge from Jesus to Israel to be Israel. Which means the Sermon on the Mount is a challenge from Jesus to us to be who we are. Jesus says you are salt. You are light. Not that you could be, or you should be, or maybe if you just did this then. You already are. You already are what God needs you to be. But the truth is, if we aren't careful, we will miss the ingeniousness of Jesus calling us salt and light. Because I'm telling you what, the guy is actually a pretty good preacher. If we aren't careful, we will get up from this place and be like, okay, I'll go out there and I'll be light or I'll be tastier, and that'll last for a moment. If we aren't careful, we'll take it as an excuse to reinvent ourselves and go out there and try and do our best. And if we aren't careful, we'll take this as a great big church pep talk. When Jesus says we're light and we're salt, maybe what we're supposed to wonder is what kind of salt and what kind of light are we? I mean, it's like I told the kids. Salt purifies and preserves and flavors and creates traction and melts and heals, and it can signify wisdom and loyalty. It's a lot for salt. So maybe if you're salt, you do some of those things in the world. Heal someone or be an anchor for someone. Never leave when the going gets tough. Or maybe you add flavor through creativity or art. Salt's many, many things. And you might be one or two of them. And light the same. It provides wisdom, or vision and direction and reflection and warmth, presence and newness and salvation. And if you're light, you might be one of those things. You're not going to be all of them. Salt and light don't do the same things. And different types of salt do different types of things, and the same with light. But Jesus says you are salt. You are light, and the world needs those things. Which means the world needs you. What Jesus would have wanted when he walked out on me is for us to leave the classroom and follow him straight out the door into the waiting world, trusting that a dash of salt and a glimmer of light can provide the world exactly what it needs. Jesus would say, be salt, be light, be you.